Welcome to Antique Dust Out of the Closet. I'm Rob, and if you're familiar with the regular Antique Dust podcast, you'll know we usually spend our time having a laugh about old TV shows, forgotten films, and the wonderfully ridiculous corners of pop culture history. But this new series is something different, more personal, more serious, though I hope no less engaging. Out of the Closet focuses specifically on LGBTQ+ stories, literature and culture that have shaped our community and our understanding of ourselves. While the main show celebrates the camp and the kitsch, this series looks closer at works that have a genuine literary and cultural significance, the books, films and stories that didn't just entertain us, but helped us survive, understand ourselves and find our place in the world. Today we're exploring a book that fundamentally changed not just American literature, but how readers across the Atlantic and around the world understood the gay experience, Edmund White's A Boy's Own Story. We're recording this as both a celebration and as a farewell to Edmund White, who passed away recently. White wasn't just a novelist, he was a cultural architect who helped build modern gay literature on both sides of the pond. His death represents the end of an extraordinary era, but his influence continues to ripple through contemporary writing and readers' lives from New York to London to Manchester and beyond. A Boy's Own Story, published in 1982, was revolutionary in ways that might be difficult to fully appreciate today. The cultural landscape was hostile when the book appeared. Ronald Reagan was president in America, Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister in Britain, and the AIDS crisis was emerging into public consciousness. Homosexuality had only been partially decriminalised in England and Wales in 1967, and only for men over 21, while remaining completely illegal in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Section 28, which would prohibit the promotion of homosexuality, was still a few years away, but the cultural anxieties it would codify were already present. In this environment, White's novel presented a young gay man's experience not as pathology or tragedy, but as serious literature's raw material. For many readers, including myself, it was among the first novels to authentically capture growing up different, whether in suburban America, provincial Britain or anywhere young gay people felt isolated and searching. I encountered this book in the late 1980s as an older teenager, when its power was most immediate. Born at the tail end of the 1960s, I was coming of age during the peak Thatcher era. I ordered it from a gay mail-order book service with a cheaply printed catalogue, an absolute godsend for someone growing up in Scotland without access to bookshops stocking this material. These catalogues were lifelines for young gay people in rural areas or small towns, offering postal discretion that meant exploring literature without browsing anxiety or wondering if someone might see you. Reading White's opening pages was like experiencing a literary earthquake. Here was a voice speaking directly to experiences I thought were mine alone: confusion, shame, desperate hunger for understanding and connection. While White's narrator navigated 1950s American suburbia, the emotional landscape felt utterly familiar to someone growing up gay in 1980s Scotland. To understand the book's groundbreaking nature, we need to grasp the early 1980s literary landscape. Gay literature as a distinct category was still in its infancy on both sides of the Atlantic. The few books dealing with homosexuality were often coded, usually tragic, and written from sympathetic but ultimately outside perspectives. In Britain, the tradition was particularly constrained. While writers like E.M. Forster wrote about homosexuality with unprecedented honesty in novels like Morris, that book wasn't published until after Forster's death in 1971. Joe Orton's work was brilliant but focused on satire rather than internal psychological development. Missing was literature treating gay experience as primary subject matter. worthy of extended artistic exploration. White emerged as part of what would become the gay literary renaissance of the 1970s and 80s, along with writers like Andrew Holleran, Felice Picano and others in the Violet Quill Club. He was part of a generation refusing marginalisation, determined to create new gay literature. The title, A Boy's Own Story, is brilliant cultural commentary. In Britain it deliberately echoes The Boy's Own Paper, the famous periodical running from 1879 to 1967, filled with tales of empire, adventure and masculine virtue. White was claiming space traditionally reserved for conventional boyhood stories and filling it with something radically different. What struck me most was White's refusal to offer easy answers or comfortable resolutions. This wasn't triumphant self-acceptance or healing coming out stories. Instead, it was clear-eyed examination of being young, gay, and searching for identity in a world offering few roadmaps. One of White's greatest achievements is creating a protagonist who feels completely real in all his contradictions. The unnamed narrator is neither hero nor victim, but something much more complicated and human. The boy we meet is intelligent, sensitive, often painfully self-aware. He's also manipulative, self-destructive, and capable of cruelty, particularly toward himself. White doesn't try to make us like his protagonist. Instead, he makes us understand him. And this is crucial to the book's power. It refuses to present gay experience through the lens of victimhood or special pleading. The narrator's family relationships are particularly well drawn. His father is largely absent, both physically and emotionally, leaving the boy to navigate confusion largely alone. His mother is more present, but often overwhelmed by her own struggles. These family dynamics feel authentic rather than constructed to serve the plot. Remarkable is how White captures the texture of adolescent consciousness. The narrator's thoughts move in associative, often contradictory patterns of real teenage thinking. He is simultaneously sophisticated and naive, worldly and innocent. He can analyse his situation with remarkable clarity one moment and make devastating miscalculations the next. The book's treatment of sexuality is particularly nuanced. White shows us a young person experiencing desire but having no framework for understanding it. The narrator's early sexual encounters are often awkward, confused, or tinged with shame. White doesn't romanticise these experiences, but doesn't present them as inherently traumatic either. They're simply part of the messy growing up process. Most powerful is how White shows the narrator's survival strategies. He learns to read social situations carefully, hide aspects of himself that might provoke rejection, to develop a performative masculinity that feels foreign. These survival mechanisms are both necessary and destructive, and White presents them with perfect psychological accuracy. A Boy's Own Story operates on multiple thematic levels. At its core, it's a meditation on identity formation, but White complicates this by showing how identity is never fixed or easily defined. The tension between authentic self-expression and social conformity run throughout. The narrator desperately wants to fit in, be accepted, find his place in the world, but every conformity attempt requires suppressing essential parts of himself. White shows us how this creates an existential split, the self presented to the world and the self existing in private, often in shame and confusion. Class consciousness plays a crucial role, though it's often overlooked. The narrator is acutely aware of social hierarchies and his place within them. His sexuality becomes entangled with class anxiety in complex ways. Sometimes his difference makes him feel inferior. At other times it seems to grant him the status of sophisticated outsider. The theme of performance is central to the book. The narrator constantly performs versions of himself: dutiful son, promising student, normal teenager. White shows us how exhausting this constant performance becomes, and how it can lead to alienation from the authentic self. Most powerfully, the book explores the theme of narrative itself, how we construct stories about our own lives, how we make meaning from experience, how memory shapes and reshapes our understanding of who we are. The adult narrator, looking back, constantly reinterprets events, seeing patterns and meanings that were invisible at the time. White's prose is a masterclass in psychological realism. His writing is simultaneously lyrical and precise, capturing both grand adolescent emotions and the small telling details that reveal character. The prose has a peculiar quality of being both immediate and distanced. We're inside the narrator's head, but also observing him from the perspective of mature reflection. The book's structure mirrors memory's fragmentary nature. Scenes flow into each other with dreamlike logic, creating a portrait that feels impressionistic yet psychologically accurate. White doesn't tell the story chronologically. Instead, he moves through themes and emotions, allowing the reader to piece together the narrator's development. To understand White's full impact, it's illuminating to compare A Boy's Own Story with more contemporary gay coming-of-age literature that has reached mainstream success. Two works that perhaps demonstrate both White's influence and the evolution of LGBTQ+ storytelling are Andre Aciman's Call Me By Your Name and Becky Albertalli's Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda, filmed as Love, Simon. Published in 2007, Call Me By Your Name centres on 17-year-old Elio's romance with Oliver and is set in 1980s northern Italy. The parallels to White's work are apparent. Both feature intelligent, sensitive protagonists navigating their first serious same-sex attraction. Both are set in the past, and both focus intensely on internal psychological landscape. Yet the differences are revealing. Where White's narrator struggles with shame and social rejection, Elio exists in a remarkably accepting environment. His parents are sophisticated and understanding. His sexuality, while complex, isn't a source of fundamental family conflict. This reflects both progress and privilege. Aciman's work presents a much more rarefied world than White's suburban American reality. Love, Simon represents another evolutionary step. Simon exists in a contemporary American suburban environment, not unlike White's narrator's world, but with crucial differences. Simon has supportive friends, eventually accepting parents, and lives in a culture where gay identity, while still challenging, isn't the isolating experience White documented. Where White's narrator has no roadmap, no visible gay adults to provide guidance, Simon has representation, if limited. He knows gay people exist, has cultural references, can imagine a future for himself. Simon's coming out is ultimately triumphant, his conflicts largely resolved, his identity integrated. White's narrator ends his story still struggling, still searching, still carrying the scars of his formation. This isn't to diminish either work, but to highlight how each serves different cultural functions. White wrote for gay readers who had never seen themselves in literature, providing validation and recognition. Albertalli wrote for young adult readers, providing hope and representation for a generation growing up with more acceptance than any that came before. What's remarkable is how White's psychological insights remain relevant across all these works. The fundamental questions he explored: how do we form identity? How do we navigate desire in a complex social world? How do we integrate our authentic selves with societal expectations? These continue to resonate even as the social contexts have dramatically shifted. I'm struck by disturbing parallels to our current moment. While progress for gay rights has been extraordinary, we're witnessing a concerning backlash that echoes the hostility of the 1980s. Today's landscape feels disturbingly familiar. We're seeing unprecedented attacks on LGBTQ+ rights, from bathroom bills to restrictions on gender-affirming care, from book banning campaigns to attempts to roll back marriage equality. The rhetoric is strikingly similar to the 1980s, positioning gay people as threats to children, family values and social stability. The current backlash particularly targets transgender people, but it's expanding to affect all LGBTQ+ individuals. Political movements are attempting to systematically roll back decades of progress using many of the same arguments and tactics deployed against gay rights in the 1980s. The book banning campaigns targeting gay literature create conditions remarkably similar to what I experienced in the 1980s. Young gay people today are again finding it more difficult to access books that reflect their experiences. The same arguments used against books like A Boy's Own Story in the 1980s, that they promote homosexuality, corrupt youth, undermine family values, are being recycled today. Yet, there are crucial differences. The queer community today has institutional support, legal protections and cultural visibility that just didn't exist in the 1980s. Marriage equality, anti-discrimination laws and mainstream acceptance provide some buffers against the current backlash. And perhaps most importantly, there's now a substantial body of queer literature that can't be easily erased. This historical parallel makes White's work feel urgently contemporary. His refusal to sanitize or simplify gay experience, his insistence on psychological complexity and emotional honesty provide a model for resistance against those who would prefer queer people remain invisible. As we face renewed attempts to silence their voices and restrict access to our literature, White's legacy becomes not just historical appreciation but active resistance. Every young person who finds their story in his work, every reader who gains empathy and understanding, these are acts of defiance against those who would prefer such stories remain untold. A Boy's Own Story arrived at a crucial moment in gay literary history. Along with works by writers like Rita Mae Brown, Armistead Maupin and Andrew Holleran, it helped establish a new canon of gay literature that was unapologetically honest about queer experience. The book found its way into countless young gay readers' hands who were searching for their own stories reflected in literature. It offered validation that their experiences mattered and deserved artistic treatment. White's influence extended beyond literature into broader cultural conversations about sexuality, identity and acceptance. What strikes me most rereading the book now is how contemporary it still feels. The specific cultural references may be dated, but the emotional landscape White maps remains remarkably current. Young gay people today still struggle with many of the same issues: identity, acceptance, the search for authentic self-expression, even as they navigate very different social contexts. This enduring relevance speaks to White's achievement in capturing something fundamental about human experience. While the external circumstances of being queer have changed dramatically since the 1950s setting of his novel, the internal journey of understanding oneself, navigating desire, and finding one's place in the world remains remarkably consistent. Edmund White gave us more than a coming-of-age novel. He gave us a map for navigating the complexities of identity and desire. His death marks the loss of a literary giant, but his words continue to offer guidance and comfort to a new generation of readers. The book's enduring power lies in its refusal to simplify or sentimentalize the experience of growing up gay. White understood that life is messy, that identity is complex, that there are no easy answers to the fundamental questions of who we are and how we should live. By embracing this complexity, he created a work of literature that continues to speak to readers across generations and cultures. In our current moment, when queer stories are again under attack, White's legacy feels both more precious and more urgent. His insistence that all lives are worthy of literary attention, that no experience is too marginal or too difficult to explore with honesty and compassion, remains a vital message for writers and readers alike. Thank you for joining me in this tribute to Edmund White and A Boy's Own Story. If you haven't read this remarkable novel, I encourage you to seek it out. And if you have read it, perhaps it's time to revisit it and discover what new insights it might offer. The book reminds us that literature at its best doesn't just entertain us, it helps us understand ourselves and our place in the world. Edmund White's legacy lives on in every reader who has found solace, understanding, or simply recognition in his words. Until next time, keep reading, keep questioning, and keep celebrating the stories that help us understand ourselves and each other.